Hi guys, my name is Attorney Walter if not the third. I'm with Disability Resolution PA, and this is probably the most important video that I'm going to be making in the 2021 year, specifically when it comes to the rights and freedoms of the American people. And this goes beyond, in one section in part, just those receiving Social Security benefits. And as you guys know, I'm creating and just about to finish up spaceconstitution.com, which is the first open source constitution. It's an amazing idea where you get to write in whatever freedoms and rights that you think you should have. And then we put it into legal terminology so that we can create future constitutions to go ahead and make the future space traveling world pro-people and not pro-government. So here we go. Most important video I'm going to be making this year, quite literally. What are the top 5 ways that cancel culture can cancel your Social Security benefits? Let that sink in. Just give a moment. Cancel culture can cancel your Social Security benefit, the things you paid for, or maybe you didn't. But the bottom line is it has the potential to cancel them. Does it? Yes. Here's 5 examples of how it could occur. There's more. I boiled it down to the top 5. We're going to start out with some easy ones, and then we'll get rolling into the heavy hitters. Number 1. Let's say that you are targeted by cancel culture, right? That's usually what happens. Cancel culture finds you, they target you, here we go. They could send individuals, if you're on disability benefits, to go ahead and take pictures of you to show that you are not disabled. They could do it from certain angles. They could take videos of you on a good day and then submit that as evidence to the Social Security Administration. And that army of cancel culture individuals could then go forward and basically work towards getting your disability benefits canceled by showing that you are not actually disabled. Even though you are, and I get it, and I understand it, but let's say that they don't take your benefits away under fraud. Let's say that they put you through a CDR. It's a CDR you didn't need, a continuing disability review. All because cancel culture found you and wanted to go ahead and produce media to harm you. Next one. Create fake evidence. Okay, so now we're not in the world of they took videos of you and they took photos of you maybe from a means and way that would hurt you. Now we're talking about creating fake evidence. Creating essentially, so you're targeted. Now all of a sudden there's a report where you were working for a company and they submit that to the SSA, showing that you have earnings, which triggers the IRS to go ahead and say, well, you didn't pay your taxes on these higher earnings. Prove to me that you didn't receive it. You get into that whole long battle and they try to remove your Social Security benefits. Can these people Photoshop, firework, create evidence? Of course. Of course they can. Of course. Well, lots of people do with Photoshop all the time. Of course. You cannot trust anything that is basically capable of being digitally produced on a computer. You just can't. You can't. Anything can be produced. Anything. Look, they can do Transformers. They can do Star Wars. Anything can be produced. Be aware of that. Fake evidence is another way, not just photos and videos of you. Okay? Now we're starting to heat up a little bit. Put pressure on government officials to deny benefits to somebody. Okay, so it's no secret that there were issues over all these elections with basically those people in power who were supposed to in some way be judges, in some way be referees, in some ways be gatekeepers to basically prevent essentially things from happening. And now we're seeing person after person is getting arrested, and we're starting to look at the case results of this, and we're seeing criminal trials related to it. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican, just look at the law of it. Erase Biden from your mind, erase Trump from your mind, just look at the law of it. All this stuff went to the Supreme Court, right, for the whole Trump thing. 62 filings. 62 filings. You, as an American who voted, deserve to see that evidence. They didn't give it to you. A little odd. There was never a true and proper discovery. You know, the part where you present all the evidence and collect all the evidence to go ahead and present it to the court, for the trial, the evidence portion of this whole thing. There was never a true and proper discovery section of this whole thing. Maybe the evidence was god-awful. The worst evidence ever seen. Maybe it was good. But we as Americans deserve to see it. The Supreme Court should have reviewed it. Dissenting opinion, I think, was the most impressive one. A lot of you guys are saying there, no. The Supreme Court should never. Remove Biden. Remove Trump. They don't exist in your mind right now. The only thing that exists is what's right for you. Not what's right for Biden. He doesn't deserve that. Not what's right for Trump. He doesn't deserve that. What's right for you? Think about that. What is right for you? You as an American deserve to see that evidence. You did. Okay? Good or bad? Obviously, it looks, with the way everything came down, like it was terrible. Well, we don't even know. We don't know. They put pressure. Different groups in the government. So let's say that you get, somebody in cancel culture says, I see you. I'm going to get my army against you. And all of a sudden now they figure out, okay, well, this person is in charge of distributing checks with the government. This person's in charge as a judge of adjudicating your claim. This person's in charge as a DDS rep to go ahead and send it up to, get a quality control review to see if you should get your disability benefits. People are people. The ones that work for the government, they don't make a whole lot of money. A lot of them own guns, and a lot of them own personal protection in some way, manner, or form. But they're going to get scared if a mob is starting to target them. So be aware that cancel culture in that regard can come your way. All right. Now we're getting to the most important changes that are occurring. There is a change. A change that happened when it comes to the defining of what a domestic terrorist is. You may have noticed that a lot of politicians are, and that includes the attorney general options, all that stuff. These lawyers are politicians. That's what they are. They're actors. You see somebody up there, oh, I'm so sad this happened to me. They're actors. Actors and actresses. That's what politicians are at this point. They're better YouTube, yada yadas than any of us, okay? That's how they got their political role. They were able to convince people through acting. I'm not a great actor. They're a great actor. When I want to watch a show, turn on politics. You're going to see a show, okay? Written by Hollywood. The point is this. They're starting to change the definition of terrorism. They have now included a definition for domestic terrorism. So you'll be noticing a lot of the terminology that's popping up in the news is about the specific elements that they want these buzzwords to be in your imagination. So you know that when you hear it, you could say that person is a domestic terrorist. Once again, remember, forget Biden, forget Trump. They don't matter. What matters is what's best for you. Definition of domestic terrorism now. The term domestic terrorism, by the way, this is coming directly from, I'll give you it right here, the 18 U.S. Code, Section 2331, definitions. It's Title 18, Part 1, Chapter 11, 113B, Section 2331. Okay. Domestic terrorism. Let's have some fun. And why is this important? Because if you attend an event, and we'll go more into detail with that, for some political whatever group, and they deem the activities of that event, you were somehow connected to it, as the qualities of a domestic terrorism situation, where you were doing things or somehow connected to it and it was doing things that fall under the statute, then that's criminal, and they will take away your Social Security benefits. Criminals who have to go to jail or prison do not get their Social Security benefits for those months and may have them further restricted. But for right now, let's just focus on defining domestic terrorism. The term domestic terrorism means things that you do equate to this. Okay, activities that A, involve acts dangerous to human life, involve things that you do that are dangerous to human life, right? That are violations of the criminal laws of the United States, federal, or any state that you're in, okay? Just putting the computer back on to get the right lighting. Let's go through it again. Domestic terrorism means activities that involve acts, things that you could do, things that other people could do that you're part of, that are dangerous to human life, that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state. B. That was A. Now we're on B. Appear to be intended. Appear to be intended. Okay, so they appear. That's a terrible word to have in law. Appear. They appear. To me, it looks like it could be this, right? That's what a politician. It appeared to me. No, it either was or it wasn't, right? If we're talking about domestic terrorism, it either was that or wasn't. It appeared to me. It shouldn't be like that. Appears to be intended. Appears to me to be intended. The act was intentional. To intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Well, that's easy. Somebody runs out with a knife and says, I hate everybody. They are intimidating the people that are there because they're holding a knife and people are afraid that they're going to get stabbed by the crazy person. Right? We just met the element. Appear to be intended. It appears to be intended that that person that ran into the crowd with a knife that says, I hate everybody, appear to be intended to intimidate. Sure, easy, it's a knife. Or coerce. Well, did he say that he wants them to change something? I don't know. I mean, with the current AG talking about how they were bombing, essentially with Molotov cocktail, these little terrible things with fire and alcohol, all these things. They're doing these things, but it's not domestic terrorism because it was done at night. Even though they were screaming how they want the government to change, how they want the government to end, anti-fascist, anti-fascist. They were screaming while destroying the government building in the middle of the night how the government needed to change, how they were destroying the front of the building, how they were making it so that the courthouse could not exist. Think about that. And the new AG that they want to pick thinks that is not domestic terrorism because it happened at night. Well, according to this law, there's nothing in here about day or night or during during business hours when business is being conducted. Because if it was only for if business is to be conducted, they'd have to put that in here. But does it intimidate or coerce a civilian population? Well, sure, it's intimidating the people around it. They're destroying the courthouse of their lands. Does it intimidate the people that are there to go ahead and administer the courthouse, the judges, the administrative people? Sure, they come back to a destroyed building and they see stuff written all over it. Let's continue. B. Appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population. Or to influence, and that's important, or versus and we keep adding them as elements and we need to meet them all. Or we just need this one, or this one, or this one. Or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. Well, wait a minute. So if they're trying to burn down a courthouse in the middle of the night to the person that they want to make the attorney general, that does not sound like to that person to influence the policy of a government by intimidation. If I were a judge and I had to go to that building the next day, I would be intimidated. I would be intimidated. I might not change how I rule on things, but I would be intimidated by what happened. I would. We get to the next or. So to influence the policy of a government, right? To influence. The wording on that is way too broad. To influence the policy of a government. Well, arrest everybody that's giving money to the politicians. They're the ones that are influencing the policy of a government. And some of them use by intimidation, Antifa, or coercion. I don't like to group BLM with Antifa because I think BLM's getting a bad shake with this whole thing. All right. Or. I know you guys are going to... I'm not making it political, but I just, that's two different groups. I know they march together, but, 3. To affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Well, how do you define mass destruction? Like, what does that even mean? How many loads of TNT would that equate to? What does that even mean? To affect the conduct of a government. Okay, so we're changing how the government would proceed going forward. By mass destruction, is that huge? Is that then we go look at the definition for mass and we realize they need to define it even more. But the bottom line is it needs to be more specific. Assassination or kidnapping, we know exactly what those are. And, now we're back to and. Now there's 3. So we had A, B, and C. Okay, so we need to have A, B, or C. And then one of these 3 here, it's an or. We need one of these right here. We need B1, B2, or B3 to be met. So we need A, B, and C, and either B1, B2, or B3 to be met. Okay? 3. Occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Ooh, there's some tricky stuff right there. Occur primarily. Not occur inside the United States. Occur primarily. Not in total. Could be outside of the United States. Could be in Russia. Occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Well, what if it's an internet attack? How do you define primarily? And then who's going to sit there and go, well, this percentage equates to exactly how much you needed to go ahead and be in this statute? This is what I like to call a horrifically written statute. The definition is way too broad. It is absolutely horrific. Right. So then I was bitching about it, so I did a search, and the ACLU. Okay, we all know what that means. But the bottom line is the ACLU. Sometimes I get it right. Sometimes I get it wrong. I want you to appreciate the time and effort that they put into explaining why the new domestic terrorism definition is absolutely mind-bogglingly, horrifically, just poorly done in every aspect. Okay, let's go into it. And we're starting right here. How the USA Patriot Act redefines domestic terrorism. Okay. And then keep in mind, it's been constantly updating with new definitions as to particular words, how it's applied in courts, and things like that. So even though that new definition is not the newest thing in the world, it's changing a lot. Okay. The definition of domestic terrorism is broad enough to encompass the activities of several prominent activist campaigns and organizations. Greenpeace, Operation Rescue, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Vizcaya Island, we'll just call it Island for right now, and WTO protesters and the Environmental Liberation Front have all recently engaged in activities that could subject them to being investigated and as engaging in domestic terrorism. Oh. So there's a lot of known groups that we might like what they're doing because they might be arguing things on behalf of the people. Forget Biden, forget Trump, what's best for you. So we have these groups that might be doing things for your civil rights, and we're getting ready to throw them under the bus because they are now meeting the definition of domestic terrorism. Okay, cool. All right, so here we go. All right. One recent example is and it's that Vizcaya, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Vizcaya, I'm not sure, island protests. When many people, including several prominent Americans, participated in civil disobedience on a military installation, that's where it's occurring, where the United States government has been engaging in regular military exercises, which these protesters opposed. The protesters illegally entered the military base. Ooh, government property. Here we go. So we're within that element of, having to do with, being within. Go back to the original. I don't know if I'm going to be able to flip this thing easily, so I may just have to. And we'll just tear pages off. It doesn't matter. Going back to the whole C, occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. So we're on a military base, and we're rushing it. Sound familiar to anything that recently happened? Anybody? Washington, D.C., sound familiar? The protesters illegally entered the military base and tried to obstruct the bombing exercises. So they were not cool with bombing exercises. This conduct would fall within the definition of domestic terrorism, because the protesters broke federal law by unlawfully entering the air base, and their acts were for the purpose of influencing government policy by intimidation or coercion. The act of trying to disrupt bombing exercises arguably created the danger to human life. Arguably, right? Were they all huddled together? Were they holding the bombs themselves? Right? Purpose of okay. The act of trying to disrupt bombing exercises arguably created danger to the human life. Their own and those of military personnel. Right? So their argument is they rushed the base to stop bombing exercises, and that created immense potential harm. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But the bottom line is, we all know if you rush a military base, that's a no bueno. Criminal act, bottom line. But does it rise to the level of being a domestic terrorism? Forget Biden, forget Trump. What's best for you? Okay. So, using this hypothetical as a starting point, I'm reading it. We will go through the USA Patriot Act and explore the new governmental powers that could be brought to bear on the island protesters, whose conduct falls within the overbroad definition of domestic terrorism. They said overbroad because it is obnoxiously overbroad. And overbroad just means that they wrote when they wrote the statute out, it had too big of a language. It included too many people and included too many situations. It was just too many options that it could include. It was not specific enough. Seizure of assets, Section 806. Section 806 of the Act could result in the civil seizure of their assets without a prior hearing. Okay, so let's think about that. If they're found to be domestic terrorists, seizure of assets, Section 806, could result in the civil seizure of their assets, those people who rushed the base. Think, of like Washington, D.C. Think of your retirement benefits. Think of your disability benefits. Civil seizure of their assets without a prior hearing. Whoa. You can lose everything without a hearing. Whoa. Magna Carta stuff. I mean, we're talking about like old law getting just shoveled out of the way so that they can just go ahead and take your assets. The government, the thing that's there to protect you. Think about this. Without a prior hearing and without them ever being convicted of a crime. So before they even arrest you, they can go to your bank account and they can suck all that stuff away. It is by far the most significant change of which political organizations need to be aware. Yeah, no kidding. Section 806 amended the Civil Asset Forfeiture Statute to authorize the government to seize and forfeit all assets, foreign or domestic, of any individual entity or organization engaged in planning. This is important. In planning. You didn't do it, you just planned it. Or perpetrating, you did it, any act of domestic or international terrorism against the United States or their property. And all assets, foreign or domestic, remember the USA is everywhere. The USA is everywhere. Affording any person a source of influence over any such entity or organization. Or two, so that was one, acquired or maintained by any person with the intent and for the purpose of supporting, planning, conducting, or concealing an act of domestic or international terrorism against the United States. So pretty much, let me read it again, acquired or maintained by any person with the intent and for the purpose of supporting. So you had the intent to do it with the purpose of supporting. So you supported, just because you supported something now could make you a domestic terrorist. Just because you supported Trump during what was going on during that, you could be considered a domestic terrorist just by supporting the idea of a political party. Not actually rushing the Capitol. You could be standing back saying, guys, don't do this. But because you are connected to the campaign that was there, that political party, I'll read it again, acquired or maintained by any person with the intent or for the purpose of supporting, planning, conducting, there's the or concealing, meaning it could be one of these, doesn't need to be all of them, or concealing an act of domestic terrorism. Concealing. Well, I don't want to hand over my phone that has videos of what was going on. It might go ahead and show people doing things that which they don't want to, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? You are now considered under this, if you were at that event, a domestic terrorist, because you are, once again, concealing an act of domestic or international terrorism against the United States. Whoa. It gets better. Let's go on. Derived from, involved in, or used or intended to be used to commit any act of domestic or international terrorism against the United States, citizens or residents of the United States or their property. Whatever you have, they can take it. They can hold on to it before you've been charged, before you've had a hearing, before all that stuff. Because Section 806. I mean, technically you could say maybe they'd have to charge you, but I don't even think they would do that. In this instance, they would go ahead and begin the process of taking your assets, begin the process of filing things for charging, begin the process of doing all this prior to a hearing. I mean, maybe they'd have to charge you. I'm not even sure with what the new law is that they would have to. I'd have to read up on it and see what it is. The problem, too, is that there used to be a system that we'd use that was like consistent throughout USA law, where it's like, you know, you had this, and then 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 this. Same thing with like the evidence rules. You know, you had a scintilla of evidence, and you just, you know, beyond a reasonable doubt, you would go up your levels of required proof. It doesn't work that way with all these courts now, because, you know, this goes into different courts for FISA and all these things. It's not a good system that's set up for the people. So I don't even know. I don't even know if they would actually have to begin the process for charging you. They might have a loophole for that one. I know the government has the ability to hold a person for 48 hours with no reason. And I'm pretty sure that they have the ability to hold your assets for 48 hours without reason. So they could go ahead and basically do that and then charge you after 48 hours and then say Section 806, we're going to go ahead and hold on to your assets at that point and then begin the process of asset forfeiture from you to the government because you were labeled as a domestic terrorist because you were supporting, planning, conducting, or concealing an act of domestic or international terrorism. Remember, the whole premise of this is to show you how insanely overbroad this statute is and why it's relevant, forget Biden, forget Trump, with what's happening right now. Next paragraph. This language is broad enough to authorize the government to seize any assets of any individual involved in the island protests or of any organization supporting the protests of which the person is a member, or from any, let's hit that one again, or of any organization supporting the protests of which the person is a member. How are they supporting it? Put a cute little thing on their website. We support their struggles. Or from any individuals who were supporting the protesters in any way. In any way. You want to water before you rush the base? Yeah, that's supporting them. Possible supporters of the protesters could include student organizations that sponsored participation in the demonstration. The Rainbow Push Coalition. The Reverend Sharpton's National Action Network. And religious or community organizations that provided housing or food to the protesters. You're starting to see how overbroad this is. You're starting to see how easy it is to make a criminal out of somebody, whether they're American or not. You're starting to see how that domestic terrorism thing could take away the benefits that you paid into all those years. Let's continue reading. The civil asset forfeiture power of the United States government is awesome. I always love when they put that in law articles. It's awesome. They rarely use it. And it's like this. It's a big word for us. The government can seize and or freeze the assets on the mere assertion, no proof required, that there is probable cause. Okay, a little bit of proof, probable cause. Not much, right? Not beyond a reasonable doubt, like what we usually use, what we usually like, that there is probable cause to believe that the assets were involved in domestic terrorism. And here's the problem with just using probable cause for domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism is worse than calling somebody a racist. It's worse than calling somebody a horrific, horrific name. Domestic terrorism is like a list basically for life, where you essentially are no longer a traditional citizen, and there are many, many restrictions that occur to you in how you can travel, what you can do, what benefits you can receive, etc. Calling somebody a racist and them actually being a racist, very low on the scale compared to being called a domestic terrorist by the U.S. government. The assets are seized before a person is given a hearing and often without notice. Oh, let's go back. I didn't finish it. The assertion that there's probable cause to believe that the assets were involved in a domestic terrorism. We gave $100 to somebody who's going to go ahead and participate in an event, and the event got out of hand, and now it is what it is. The assets are seized before a person is given a hearing and often without notice. The assets are gone. Often without notice. They didn't charge you and give you notice. They could have charged you, but they didn't give you notice. Remember, they still have that 48-hour rule that they can always use. In order to permanently forfeit the assets, the government must go before a court, but at a civil hearing, and the government is only required to prove that the assets were involved in terrorism by a preponderance of the evidence. Now remember, preponderance of the evidence is beyond a reasonable doubt. It is the civil standard that we use, not the criminal standard. Criminal standard is way up here, civil standard's right about here, probable causes right around here. Reasonable suspicion right around here. Scintilla right down here. No evidence is right below that. All right. Because it is a civil proceeding, a person is not entitled to be represented by an attorney at public expense. You don't get a public defender if they cannot afford to pay an attorney. The time between seizure and forfeiture can sometimes be months. Meanwhile, organizations or individuals whose assets are seized are forced to make do without the assets. So you could be living with nothing. They make you instant homeless. That's what the government has the power to do. Remember when you were part of that whole thing called the formation of America as a citizen of America, and you were like, hey, I want to make a government. And I want to make something clear. When a lot of people are like, well, how big should the government be? How big should the government be? Should it be like this big? Should it be like this big? Should it be like this big? How big should the government be? It should only be as big as the people allow it to become, so that the people can overthrow it. The moment that the United States government is larger than the people's ability to overthrow it, it is unconstitutional. Let me say that again. The moment, the second, the instant, the wow, it just happened. The moment the United States government becomes bigger than the people's, the citizens, the people that you know, and all those little cute little HOA houses, the moment that those people are not able to overthrow that government, then the government is constitutionally too large. That's how it works. That's why they created all these laws. That's why I'm creating Space Constitution, to teach people about all these amazing things that exist out there. That's the bottom line. Okay, let's keep going. Because it is still a procedure, they're not entitled to representation at the public expense, yada yada. Time between seizure, we already did that. Only the most financially flush, non-profit organizations would be able to successfully defend themselves against government forfeiture. I disagree with that sentence. If they take their assets, how are they financially flush? In short, without the full due process afforded in criminal cases, right? You get an attorney, you don't need lots of money to begin the process, you don't have to hire a fancy attorney, yada, yada, yada. Without the full due process afforded in criminal cases, the U.S. government can bankrupt political organizations it asserts are involved in domestic terrorism. Not only that, it can bankrupt people, take their assets, remove their benefits that it asserts are involved in domestic terrorism. That's a problem. Okay. Let's keep going. All right. Post-Patriot Act laws. Since passage of the Patriot Act, 2 other new laws have passed that implicate domestic terrorism. All right, we'll go through this one. Taxpayer information, 26 U.S.C.A., Section 6103, subsection I3C, requires the Secretary of the Internal Revenue Service to provide taxpayer information to the appropriate federal law enforcement agency responsible for investigating or responding to the terrorist incident. If abused, this provision can be used by law enforcement to gain access to confidential taxpayer information of political protesters. This is how they figure out who you are. This is how they figure out what assets you have. This is how they figure out how to take what you need to defend yourself. That's the new post-Patriot Act law. This is how they figure out how to beat you. Regulations of biological agents and toxins, 42 U.S.C.A., Section 262A, and 7 U.S.C.A., Section 8401, regulate biological agents and toxins. If a person is involved with an organization that engages in domestic or international terrorism, he or she is not permitted to gain access to these regulated agents. So let's say that you're a guy that's like an over-the-road trucker and you have to go ahead and transport chemicals. Well, guess what, buddy? Ain't gonna do that anymore. Sorry, because you went to an event one time and it didn't go as you thought it would, but you support the ideas behind it and you lost your way of living. Under the law, the Attorney General identifies individuals involved in terrorism to the Department of Agriculture. Once the person is listed, he or she cannot get access to any of the regulated agents or toxins. So basically, every farmer that wants to partake in any, event that could fall within this can no longer be a farmer. This provision will probably not impact most people, except farmers, of course, the people who make our food. However, it might impact someone such as a scientist. Oh, yeah, what about them? Who might regularly use biological agents or toxins in their work. Yeah. Conclusion. The ACLU does not oppose criminal prosecution of people who violate the law, even if they are doing it for political purposes. Okay, cool statement. However, we do oppose the broad definition of terrorism and the ensuing authority that flows from that definition. One way to ensure that the conduct that falls within the definition of domestic terrorism is in fact terrorism is to limit the scope. That's what we always say in law. We need to limit the scope of this law. We need to make the scope more narrow, so that it doesn't include everything under the sun, which is pretty much what the statute does. I mean, a small thing could happen. It includes hundreds of organizations and hundreds of people very easily. Limit the scope of the conduct that triggers the definition. Thus, domestic terrorism could include acts which cause serious physical injury or death, rather than all acts that are dangerous to human life. A lot of things are dangerous to human life. The fact that they caused actual human life injury is what they're saying. Cause serious physical injury or death, right? Which is ironically the same standard you need to fear when you're pulling out a gun on somebody. Rather than all acts that are dangerous to human life. They make a great point here. All acts that are dangerous to human life. I gave that person right over there some Skittles. It turns out they're allergic. Turns out that they are a political person. And I've put some tweets online on Facebook, whatever. I don't have Twitter, but you're going to learn at some point that I'm not into all this online, mishka. So the bottom line is this. Something happens. Some political figure is injured. You've put posts on there against agendas that he has, and boom, dangerous to human life. They're saying it should have a clause that says acts which cause serious physical injury or death. Right? That makes sense. This more narrow definition will exclude the conduct of organizations and individuals that engage in minor acts of property damage or violence. Okay, so let's go to the next part. Now we have the domestic terrorism definitions and terminology and methodology utilized by the Department of Homeland Security, and more specifically what we're dealing with here is the FBI. Okay? Publish L-116-92 National Defense Authorization Act for the fiscal year of 2020. Their entire requirement here and purpose is to develop standardized definitions of terminology relating to domestic terrorism, DT, and uniform methodologies for tracking incidents of DT, domestic terrorism. This is requested to be done jointly by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, and in consultation with the Director of the National Intelligence. Now, they have a disclaimer here. I would like to read the disclaimer for you because it is the most mind-warping, unbelievable thing you will ever hear. I'm going to read it to you quickly, and then I'm going to read it to you from a lawyer's brain. Let us begin. Under FBI policy and federal law, no investigative activity may be based solely on First Amendment activity. The FBI does not investigate, collect, or maintain information on U.S. persons solely for the purpose of monitoring activities protected by the First Amendment. All personnel should exercise sound judgment and discretion in evaluating the totality of circumstances surrounding any of these indicators in order to determine whether a law enforcement or intelligence response or activity is warranted. When you read that kind of quickly, it makes it sound like they're not capable of investigating you for something. But what they're actually saying is they're not going to investigate you solely on First Amendment activity. But everything else, they sure can. They sure can and will. Let's read it again. Under FBI policy and federal law, no investigative, activity may be based solely on First Amendment activity. So they can't investigate your activity solely based upon First Amendment activity. But how hard is it to link your activity to anything? The FBI does not investigate, collect, or maintain information on U.S. persons solely for the purpose of monitoring activities protected by the First Amendment. They just stated that a different way. It was cute. They said it in one sentence, and then they said it another way. All personnel should exercise sound judgment and discretion in evaluating the totality of the circumstances. Oh, there it is. There it is. All personnel, all FBI, and other federal agencies should exercise sound judgment and discretion. They should use their brain in evaluating the totality of circumstances. Totality of circumstances is a legal phrase, meaning everything that's going on in the circumstance surrounding any of these indicators in order to determine whether a law enforcement or intelligence response or activity is warranted. So what they're saying here is, we're not going to look at you if you're doing a First Amendment thing, but they should be aware of anything else that's occurring, right? To see if they should step in. Even though you may be protesting and using your First Amendment right, just take a look around. What else? What else? What else could we use? Well, that could be potential human danger. That person's standing on a ledge of a fountain. That person's pulling over a statue. Okay, that could be some bad stuff. Well, now it's not First Amendment right. Now it's domestic terrorism. We need to take their assets. We need to remove their right to their benefits. We'll charge them and let them know later. All right. Definition. Domestic terrorism for the FBI's purposes is referenced in U.S. Code at 18 U.S.C. 2331, subsection 5. That's what we read before. And it's defined as activities. So this is where they kind of bright-lined it for the FBI. Involves acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, U.S. and state. I'm surprised that they didn't include here possessions of the United States. I'm surprised of that. I mean, if they were going to go big and broad, they could have taken that next step. You know, maybe they say criminal laws of the United States, maybe, but I'm surprised they didn't include the possessions of the United States. If they're going to do it, Just do it, you know. Appearing to be intended to, 1, intimidate or coerce the civilian population. 2, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion. Or 3, affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. And, so it's one of those 3, but then and, here's number 3 again, occurring primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Okay. I'm just looking through to see if there's anything in here. This is where they go into terminology. They talk about racially or ethnically motivated violent extremism, anti-government or anti-authority violent extremism, animal rights, environmental violent extremism, abortion-related violent extremism, all their domestic terrorism threats. Let's read that one because it's specific to our situation. This category encompasses threats involving the potentially unlawful use or threat of force or violent in furtherance of ideological agendas which are not otherwise defined under or primarily motivated by one of the other domestic terrorism threat categories, the ones we just talked about. So this is like the catch-all, right? Such agendas could flow from, but are not limited to, a combination of personal grievances and beliefs, including those described in other domestic terrorism threat categories. Some actors in this category may also carry bias related to religion, gender, or sexual orientation. So these are their categories. Racial or ethnically, anti-government, anti-authority, animal rights, environmental, violent, abortion-related, and then all other. So they categorize what they fall into. Okay. Oh, right. And then I printed this out. Merrick Garland says that as Attorney General, he will fight discrimination and domestic terrorism. You can just see what they're setting up here. They're setting up people who want who want freedoms, who want rights, who want to fight for them in a non-violent way. That could, anybody go, potential human harm. They're setting it up to basically make anybody that wants to try and, have an agenda for their own rights and freedoms. Forget Biden, forget Trump, what's best for you. They're making it so that their political agenda wins while they're in office. I'm disgusted by this. I don't love Biden. I don't love Trump. They're not family, you know what I mean? I want you guys to realize what's going on so that you can see there's a problem brewing here. And it's a big problem. Let's go over to Justice Department. Biden may have trouble cracking down on domestic terrorism because of free speech and the FBI. I don't think he will. The definition is so overbroad, I don't think Biden will have a difficult time cracking down on anybody that opposes whatever political ideas he has. Now look, he wants to do some great stuff. You can't deny that. Some of the stuff is just absolutely incredible that he wants to do. You can't deny that. At the same time, I'm about to show you, and that was one of the things, domestic terrorism. That was one of the 5 things that we're talking about here. And remember, every time that they talk about fighting, here, let's go back to this over here. Fighting discrimination, there's usually an underlying agenda that's occurring that is somehow being affected by how they want to change the law to make it so that people are more controlled. There's usually that underlying agenda. Now, that's all bad. But it ain't even close. It ain't even close to what I'm about to show you. Oh, and I didn't go through the whole terrorist exclusion list, how basically they can punish you, what they can do to you, the types of process, the legal ramifications. I didn't go through this because otherwise this thing will just take forever. But the bottom line is this. We need to have a discussion first about what social credit systems are when controlled by the government. The United States government does not have a social credit system like China. We have what's called Equifax, TransUnion. We have third-party groups that review on an unbiased system, which you could argue this and that, but whatever. Let's just say, for the most part, unbiased system right now. that says, okay, these people can get these credit cards, these people can get these amount of loans, these people yada yada yada, based upon what you earn, how well you've been handling your credit, etc. Places like China do not have those. Places like China have their government in control of that system. And that system is called a social credit system. And that's a problem. Let me tell you why. Because in a government-controlled social credit system, the government has the ability to control all aspects of your life. Because instead of just being a financial metric to decide what mortgages you can get, what credit cards you can get, what kind of things you can go ahead and basically have, right? The ability to purchase a car, the ability to purchase a house. That's essentially the limitations of what some TransUnion would do, but you can still fight it. You have legal ramifications as opposed to it being like the Chinese government. Well, the Chinese government takes it further. For its citizens, they get a score, and that score is a numeric qualifier for certain things. And if you fall too low in that, because you could be a domestic terrorist, because you could not agree with the agenda, maybe you couldn't pay off that loan, maybe you'd file for bankruptcy, well then, guess what, buddy? Let's talk about that. In China, that equates to travel bans. As of June 2019, according to the National Development and Reform Commission of China, 26.82 million air tickets as well as 5.96 million high-speed rail tickets have been denied to people. That's over 30 million tickets. Have been denied to people who were deemed untrustworthy under the social credit system. They are on a blacklist. It's travel ban. You want to go see somebody? Have fun. Exclusion from school admissions. If the parents of a child were to score below a certain threshold, their children would be excluded from the private schools in the region or even national universities. Whoa. That's how you affect the next generation. Social status. One's personal score could be used as a social symbol on social and couples platforms. For example, China's biggest matchmaking service, Bay, or whatever it is, allows its users to publish their own score. That's great. You can find love through your credit score. That's the best way to find somebody. Repression of religious minorities. Remember, Jewish background. City-level pilot projects for the social credit score system have included rewarding individuals for aiding authorities in enforcing restrictions on religious practices, including coercing practitioners of Falun Gong to renounce their beliefs and reporting to, I can't pronounce it, Uyghurs, who publicly pray, fast during Ramadan, or perform other Islamic practices. So now, we do not have freedom of religion because it is against the social score. Debt collection. A Hebei court, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the point is, released an app showing a map of deadbeat debtors. That's the quote. Remember, keep in mind, this is all from Wikipedia. This is like, the most basic encyclopedia entries. Within 500 meters, and encouraged users to report individuals who they believe could repay their debts. So now we have the Russia-style situation with communism. Report your family. Report your friends. You won't see your family anymore if you report them, but don't worry about it. Everything's cool. A spokesman of the court stated that it's a part of our measures to enforce our rulings and create a socially credible environment. Oh, who loves that? Just gonna love that. All right. Public display. Mugshots of blacklisted individuals are sometimes displayed on large LED screens on buildings or shown before the movie in movie theaters. The rewards of having a high score include easier access to loans and jobs and priority during bureaucratic paperwork. Likewise, the immediate negative consequences for a low score or being associated to someone with a low score bring honor on our family. Range from lower internet speeds to being denied access to certain jobs, loans, and visas. For businesses. Among other things, the social credit system is meant to provide an answer to the problem of lack of trust on the Chinese market. Proponents argue that it will help eliminate problems such as food safety issues, cheating, and counterfeit goods. China claims its aim is to enhance trust and social stability by creating a culture of sincerity. For businesses, the social credit system is meant to serve as a market regulation mechanism. Well, what's that? What market regulation mechanism? Here we go. The goal is to establish a self-enforcing regulatory regime fueled by a big data situation in which businesses exercise self-restraint because they needed the government to tell them to exercise self-restraint. Or they could have just had laws. But they didn't want that. They wanted to take the next step, which is slavery and control of your assets and your business. Let's continue to read. It's fun. The basic idea is that with a functional credit system in place, companies will comply with government policies and regulations to avoid having their scores lowered by disgruntled employees, customers, or clients. As currently envisioned, companies with good credit scores will enjoy benefits such as a good credit condition, lower tax rates, and more investment opportunities. Believe in the government, and it will provide. Don't believe in the government, you're not going anywhere. Companies with bad credit scores will potentially face unfavorable conditions for new loans, higher tax rates, investment restrictions, and lower chances to participate in publicly funded projects. Government plans also envision real-time monitoring of business activities. In that case, infrastructure on the part of a business could result in a lowered score almost instantly. However, whether this will actually happen depends on the future implementation of the system as well as on the availability of technology needed for this kind of monitoring, which they've already figured out, which is already going on. What does that do? Well, if you don't believe in the government, they're going to basically remove your ability to have any freedom at all, and you will be a slave to the system, and they will remove your ability to do upward mobility. China Z allowed to remain president for life as term limits removed. BBC. The vote was widely regarded as a rubber stamping exercise. 2 delegates voted against the change and 3 abstained out of the 2,964 votes. China had imposed a 2-term limit on its president since the 1990s. But Mr. Z, who would have been due to step down in 2023, defied the tradition of presenting a potential successor during October's Communist Party Congress. So, this man, right here, will now not be known as the president of China. He is the emperor of China. There are no more term limits. Mao Zedong. So guess what? If you do something that they don't like, if you disagree with the government, they can remove your benefits. That's the problem here. Now, we don't have that in America. We don't have that. The Balance article. Biden may move to fire the big 3 credit bureaus. Proposes a national credit reporting agency, aims to minimize racial bias. That has nothing to do with racial bias. This is the only thing that will ruin America within a year's time. This is the only thing that will destroy America. Worse than an army, worse than a plague, this is it. Forbes Advisor. President Biden's plan to change credit reporting and scoring. The problem, racial disparities and credit inaccuracies. Racial disparities in wealth and credit. Oh, okay, now we're going to use that to go ahead and enslave everybody. Sounds like fair trade? Nope. No, we could just create rules that make those credit agencies in the U.S., Equifax, TransUnion, follow better guidelines. We could just do that instead of putting everything in the hands of the federal government, which would equate to slavery for every human being that was a citizen of America. Now we're going to be looking at Biden wants to change how credit works in America. This is from Fortune.com. The credit industry isn't working if you ask consumer advocates. Which ones? The big three credit agencies, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, are black boxes, gathering and selling consumer data, grading us on our financial behavior without letting us in on how they do it, and perpetuating damaging racial disparities while they're at it. Well, we could just make laws that make it so that we could see how they do all this. Then we could change how they do all this. Do not put the federal government in charge of a social credit system. Here we go again with some more Fortune. That's why consumer advocates are calling for a public credit reporting agency, and why President-elect Joe Biden has adopted a proposal for just that from left-leaning think tank demos. This will destroy America. This is the most important. I don't care where you sit. If you care about being able to get a loan, get a car, get a house, have whatever the American dream is, you will not let this happen. If you want to keep your Social Security benefits, you will not let this happen. That is one thing that is far worse than a nuclear explosion. It is far worse than the changing of domestic terrorism to a hyper, inexcusably broad definition. It's worse than cancel culture. It's worse than all of those combined. A federally controlled credit system is the last thing you want, because it is what China used to enslave its inhabitants. That is how cancel culture can cancel your benefits. My name is Attorney Walter Knott. If you have any questions and it's related to obtaining benefits, call me, catch up with me at the law firm. If, you essentially have anything you want to add to this or comment on this or catch up, I donate 2 hours every week on Thursday, 8 to 10, live. And basically, I'll be live on YouTube, where you can catch up with me there, Eastern Standard Time, 8 to 10 p.m. Have an absolutely wonderful night. This is extremely serious stuff. Start learning about it. I'll catch you a little bit later. Bye-bye.